in the phonographic type token model. Secondly, I'll introduce Kaplan's stage continuum model for words and explain why he considers the phonographic type token model to be flawed. And then I'll present Kaplan's two arguments against the stage continuum model, and at the end I will try to show how both arguments fail to actually invalidate the stage continuum model. Okay, so we all know the term words is ambiguous. Scholars and laymen use it for referring to different linguistic items, and often morphology provides us with fine-grained notions for a clear disambiguation, okay? But I want to press the attention on one fundamental ambiguity of the term word, which is the ambiguity between a word as a unique and abstract entity on one hand, and its indefinitely many concrete utterances, inscriptions, and the like on the other. In common and technical parlance, we tend to use the term word in both cases, and such are two contrasting senses in which we use the word word, as Fine said. Okay, two samples. Competent speaker knows 20,000 words. In this first case, with words we mean unique and abstract entities. On the other hand, if I say there are 3 words on the paper, dog, dog, and dog, even if on one hand we can say that dog is one word, in this case with words we mean concrete inscriptions, okay? Well, this is not big news, and typically this ambiguity is treated in terms of types and tokens. There are several type token models actually, and they differ in the way they characterize the type, and they differ in the way they cache out the relationship between the type and the token. But here I'm going to speak about what I call the phonographic type token model, because this is what Kaplan wants to refute. Okay? However, Kaplan makes a mistake somehow, according to many scholars. Actually, he thinks that once you have dispelled the phonographic type token model, you have dispelled the type token vocabulary in whole. Okay? So you have to propose a radical new alternative. But according to many scholars, actually, since there are different type token models, you can refuse the phonographic type token model and then present another kind of type token model. Maybe you can describe differently the relation between the types and the token. You can have another characterization of the type, but you can always use the type token vocabulary. But Kaplan believes that the type token model at the end is the phonographic type token model, which I will tell what are the characteristics of this model. So, word is ambiguous between types and tokens. Types are abstract objects, and tokens are concrete particulars. A concrete particular is a token of a type if and only the token ON, for instance, instantiates the phonographic properties of the type O. So, according to this phonographic type token model, grammatical categories or meaning do not interfere in the individuation of words. The only thing that matters is phonographology, let's say. The type is the class of all these tokens. Let us then construe the types of single signs as the classes of the tokens. Sometimes also said that types are kinds. But most importantly, the type O encodes the phonographic pattern, and this token OM instantiates that pattern. Okay, this is, well, we will say, the rough characterization of the phonographic type token model. So, there are mainly two kinds of reasons for Kaplan rejecting this kind of model. One extrinsic reason and one intrinsic reason, we could say. So, the
intrinsic reason is this. The phonographic type token model is incompatible with the causal theory reference, while Kaplan's stage continuum model is implied by it. Intrinsic reason. Phonographic type token model is flawed itself, since it fails to account for basic intuitions regarding word identity, while Kaplan's stage continuum model does not. These are the two kind of reasons Kaplan provides us in order to justify this rejection. Due to time constraints, I'm going to talk about the intrinsic reason only, even if the extrinsic reason is quite interesting. Okay, let's see a couple of basic intuitions we're talking about. There is a single word color spelled in two ways, and there is a single word schedule pronounced in different ways. On the other hand, there are two words, base, one meaning low and the other meaning bottom. So we want to say that color spelled in two ways are not different words. We tend to say that it is the same word. On the other hand, we want to say that base is one word with so different meanings, like bank. We tend to consider bank to be two different words. And so you can track down the difference between logical polysemy and accidental polysemy. You know, words like Italy is polysemous, but is polysemous within a range of logically connected concepts. However, the phonographic type token model is at odds with both A and B, since different phonographic patterns make for different words, since phonographic patterns are all that matters for words identity, and the same phonographic pattern, for the same reasons, makes for the same words. So this is Kaplan's argument for rejecting, let's say, the fact that only phonographology is the thing that matters for word individuation, for individuating words and catching out words identity. So instead of modifying and reinforce the type token model, we choose to abandon the type token vocabulary and propose a radical different alternative, which is the stage continuum model. In Kaplan's view, utterances and descriptions are a stage of words, which are the continuants made up of these interpersonal stages along with some more mysterious interpersonal stages. This is the quote from Kaplan. Anyway, stages are like tokens, so there's no problem. They are concrete, perceivable entities, and that's it. The problem is, what is continuant and what's the relationship between the continuant and the stages? So words are cultural artifacts, naturalistic objects, and the sum, not the class, of concrete utterances and description. We have other kinds of stages, like mental stages. But anyway, most importantly, we deal with utterances and descriptions. Okay, cultural artifacts, because according to Kaplan, they are created by humans. They are naturalistic objects because they live somehow in the concrete world instead of being abstract entities in some Platonic heaven, let's say, and the sum of concrete utterances and description. Well, think about an island group. Okay, an island group is made up of little pieces of land. And so think about this. The pieces of land are the stages, and the island group is the word. The words. So the word is as abstract as an island group could be. Let's say, we can say that an island group is not an abstract object after all. Is it made of concrete pieces? But on the other hand, is it not a, let's say, unique object like, a cat? We have this sense of indecision about what an island group is, and the same is for words. Okay? Words is not an abstract object as abstract as the type could be. On the other hand, it is neither concrete like a stage is, but these are arguments for showing that our naturalistic object, cultural artifact in this sense. Importantly, the radical difference is in the relationship between continuants and stages. Stages, namely utterances, inscription, are linked together by intention, not by phonographic resemblance or other kinds of intrinsic properties stage might have. Only extrinsic properties, intention. And this is why this is called an intentional theory of word individuation. So continuants have not fixed form which has to be resembled by the stages. In order for a stage O(n) to count as a stage of the continuant O, it has to be produced intentionally by a person with the intention of continuing the transmission of the words O she mastered. Okay? I want to transmit words I heard before, and I produce something, and that something is a stage of the word I want to transmit. So intention is necessary condition for something being a stage of a continuant. So in doing so, she does not need to imitate no spelling or sound. The stage counts as a stage of a word if the proper intentional state obtains and the repetition succeeds. So Kaplan says it is beyond doubt that the utterance or inscription transmitted could be an utterance or inscription of the same words as that received, although the difference in phonographology, the difference in sound or shape or spelling could be just about as great as you would like it to be. This is really strong claim. So intention as necessary condition, but also sufficient condition. Because Kaplan says that speakers with speech disabilities do speak and communicate in virtue of their intention, even if the outputs turn out to be mere mumblings. Well, I have to say something. In this case, the mere mumbling must be systematic somehow, okay? Because if I, by accident, maybe I am, I don't know, injured, and I intend to pronounce my name, but I end up with mumbling. In this case, Kaplan would be that is not stage, because that is not a performance at all. Because I would be able to produce the correct stage, and I would say, yes, that's not my name, however. But if speech disabilities are systematics, you cannot say that a person with a speech disability is not able to produce stages of words, or people with bad handwriting are not writing words at all. So, intention as necessary and sufficient condition. Let's see a couple of advantages of the phonographic tactograph model, okay? So, now color and color may be stages of the same continuant color with the intention of repeating it. The stages base and base may be stages of different continuants due to the intention of repeating different words regardless of their phonographic properties. This is what we want to say, so stage continuant model seems to be more intuitive, okay? And, on the other hand, linguistic diachronic change is better explained as dialectical and adialectal variation. In this case, we can use the idea of a single entity undergoing change. So, change in the shape need not suggest a replacement by a word of another. You can keep the notion of a single word, single continuant undergoing a change during time. Okay, okay, let's see what Pence has to say about the stage continuant model. He proposes two arguments, the sufficiency argument and the necessity argument. Really, the sufficiency argument is meant to deny that intention is a sufficient condition for word individuation, and so the necessity argument. So, according to Pence, intention is neither sufficient nor necessary condition for word individuation. He doesn't propose a real alternative, but his paper is only pars destruens, let's say. And my main thesis, I claim that the sufficiency argument misses the point, and the necessity argument might be accommodated provided a reasonable specification in Kaplan's theory. We will see how reasonable it is, but I hope it is. Okay, the sufficiency argument runs as follows. If intension is a sufficient condition, then every physical event which is produced during the relevant intentional state S counts as an occurrence of the words O related to S. This forces us to consider a given scribble as an occurrence of O if S obtains. The conclusion is that this is an evidence that Kaplan doesn't correctly describe how we individuate words. I think this argument misses the point for one simple reason. Even if something is a stage of a continuum, it doesn't necessarily follow that that stage must be included in the extension of the term word. So, I think the individuation Fallon is talking about is a semantic individuation. What he is saying is that we wouldn't use the term word for referring to the scribble. This scribble is not included in the extension of the term word. I would use scribble for referring to this thing, not words. And so, and this is true, and Kaplan might be alright with this, okay? But this is not to say that this couldn't be a stage of a continuum. For instance, so Kaplan is not interested in individuating words in such a semantic sense. Kaplan is not interested in explaining how we use the term word for referring to things. He's not interested in give conditions for building the extension of the term word. And so consider the case of sign language. For users of such a language, occurrence of words are also gestures, okay? Which are not words. Gestures are stage of continuance, but gestures do not fall under the extension of the term word. I can produce a stage of the continuum dog making some gesture, but I wouldn't use the term word to refer to my gesture. I would use the term gesture. And these are semantic concerns that Kaplan has, rightly, but it is not what Kaplan is about in this paper. He's not interested in explaining how we individuate words in this semantic sense. Kaplan's analysis does not aim at explaining how we individuated the extension of the term words, and Kaplan, I think, is wrong in criticizing Kaplan at this point. The scribble produced in the relevant intentional state S may be a stage of O related to S without necessarily belonging to reference. Without necessarily belonging to the extension of the term word. And so I think a confusion between the semantic inquiry and the metaphysical inquiry that happens astray. And the stage continuum model is intended to capture the nature of words qua objects, not the nature of words qua words, okay? And not only words fall under Kaplan's model, also symbols and drawings might be included in the same metaphysical explanation. Drawings, symbols might be stages of words, but symbols and drawings are not included in the extension of words. So when Kaplan says that Kaplan doesn't correctly describe how we individuate words, it's true if it means that Kaplan doesn't correctly describe how we individuate words semantically, from a semantic point of view. But it is not what Kaplan is about. And there is this quote that I think is quite supportive. Even if one were to conclude that names are so unlike other words as not to be regarded as parts of any particular language, this should not count against applying the earlier principles of individuation to names, namely the stage continuum. He's saying even if his names were not words, because even if they are not part of any particular language, so they are not words, they are something else, like labels or whatever, this should not count against applying the earlier principles of considering of individuation to name. I think Kaplan missed this passage. Okay, let's get to the necessity argument. Okay, imagine a cat without any intention of communicating, who steps on my keyboards and types this. Really unlikely, but logically possible. According to Pellen, if you use this very same token here, you can use it to ask someone whether she can spare a quarter, and you manage to do it, insofar as you use a piece of language appropriate for the task. But a proponent of the necessity thesis would have to say both that the ink mark isn't a token of an English sentence because there is no intention behind it, and that I never use it to ask anyone to spare a quarter because I can't ask a question in English without using tokens of English words. Both claims are preposterous, and I have used a token of an English sentence wherever its production history might be. Again, this is fair criticism, but it is not against Kaplan's theory, actually, because this criticism presupposes that Kaplan's theory of word individuation serves the purpose of individuating the proposition encoded in the sentence type, can you spare a quarter? But this is completely false, because Kaplan is interested in the proposition conveyed by the speaker, the proposition literally meant by the speaker. For instance, there is a story about a missionary who mispronounced certain verbs. It's a very famous story of the local language leader thought that his sermon sounded like an exhortation to highly questionable behavior. But what was the missionary saying? This is about what the missionary wants to communicate. The speaker's proposition. Is what we say really so subject to the vicissitude of here and so on, to the dialect, and so on and so forth? This is clear. Kaplan here wants to propose a way of individuating words for tracking down the speaker proposition, not the proposition encoded in the language. What we say, namely the proposition expressed by the speaker, is a matter of intention. So, by contrast, the proposition encoded in the sentence is not. Okay, Kaplan's argument shows that a given sentence encodes a proposition which goes beyond the intention of the speaker, and such a proposition is made up of non-intentionally individuated words, but this is not what Kaplan wants to deny. So, think about malapropism, for instance. If a friend of mine came to me and said, I went in Egypt and I saw the sphincter. I know what he wants to say, okay? And I can say, well, you know, John went in Egypt and saw the Sphinx. I can truly say that John saw the Sphinx, but he literally pronounced, made a sound which is associated to other things, sphincters. So, I would say that the proposition intended by the speaker is that he saw the Sphinx, but the language itself encodes the proposition that he saw the sphincter. There are two propositions, so the same utterance points to two different directions. One proposition intended by the speaker and one proposition encoded in the language. If you want to track down the proposition intended by the speaker, you have to consider the intention of the speaker. You have one way of individuating words, which is the intentional one. Because the speaker, John, wanted to repeat the word sphinx, even if he made a mistake, but the word is sphinx. On the other hand, there is another way of individuating words, which is non-intentional individuating way. I don't know what the kind of way must be, but this is not the point, which tells us that I saw the sphincter is true if and only if John saw the sphincter from a point of view of the semantics of the language. So my conclusion is that there is a pluralism about words individuation, actually. We have at least two ways of individuating words, and they serve different purposes. So this, let's say this debate shows that Kaplan is showing how to individuate words intentionally for a given purpose, and Pellen is showing how to individuate words for different purposes. Maybe there is another way of individuating words, maybe Millikan is right in saying that we have to look at the origin of the words, originalism, but maybe if you want to track down the etymology of a language, you can use this way of individuating words called originalism, and you can consider Postel and Hotel to be the same word because they came from the same history. But this, again, is another way of individuating words. It could be right, it could be true for different purposes. So, well, pluralism about word individuation is the upshot of this talk. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I really enjoyed that, but I guess I have a question about the sufficiency argument at the beginning, because I didn't quite get how the response was going there, I think. So, I think your line was that the scribble doesn't have to be a word, but it can still be part of the continuant, because you can let symbols. But I guess there's two questions. There's a question about whether it's a word and whether it's something that's tokening the content dog, or tokening part of the symbol that refers to dogs.
But it depends on what your semantic theory about the term word is. I mean, this question should be answered from a semantic point of view. It depends on what you think about the meaning of the term word. If you are a, I don't know, direct reference theorist, or you are friendly in a semantics, I don't know. It depends on what is the content of the term words, which determine the way in which you use it and you think things are included in this extension. But what I wanted to say is that all this general way of thinking about semantics is in principle another thing from metaphysics which aims at individuating words without any commitment to the way in which we use the word word. So it could be part of a continuant, a stage, okay, which is a technical notion, without being
without being word. So I get that, but I mean, if it's part of a continuant, then it still has to be bearing the content that the rest of the elements of the continuant did. And isn't that what Capellan is worried about? That if I just do a scribble, even if I intend it to mean dog, it just doesn't get to mean dog because it's just, not the right kind
well,
of thing.
it could mean dog. Actually, think about, there is an experiment about pronunciation. There is a sentence which include words which ends with an il, okay, E-E-L, and the first part of the word is a cough, okay, so il. It depends on the context of the meaning of the other words which surrounds this, which is compared to a scribble, from my point of view. Il is like a scribble, but it acquires meaning according to this people who hear, which depends on the context of the other sentence. So if I say, I was driving and my tail got broken, you hear will, even if I said il. So that's the same thing, but from the point of view of listening. It means something.
Yeah,
it could mean dog, the scribble.
But I guess it's a question about whether it's me doing the filling in or whether it really is the token carrying the content.
Well, I think anyway there are types which carry the content, not tokens, in any case. Even if where D or G is not in that physical object, the content of dog is in the type or continuant, so that's no problem from my point of view.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think Emma.
In Kaplan's speech, as far as I remember, and the example of the vase seems to point in that direction, the meaning of the reference counts as to the individuation of a word, right? But maybe it's not even Kaplan acknowledged that it might not be a necessary component.
You mean the meaning?
Yeah, right.
Meaning is not
okay, fine.
Word individuation.
So if you get to lullabies, for instance, these a series of expressions that have no meaning at all, such as Jabberwocky, for instance. In that very case, it sounds to me a bit implausible to to say that the phonetic of the word doesn't matter. For if I don't utter Jaya, for instance, in Jabberwock, in the right way, they say good or something like that. It's very hard to say that that's a continuation of the very word that Lewis Carroll inaugurated.
You mean because there is no meaning?
Because there is no meaning, right? It might have the right intentions and so on and so forth, but the phonetics changed.
So you're suggesting that in the stage continuum model we should fill in the meaning as well?
No, I'm not suggesting that. For instance, in Salisbury and Thai, do not.
Well, Salisbury and Thai is
put the meaning
originalism
right,
theory
okay.
of words.
Right. So I'm not suggesting that, but I see a problem if people allow for meaningless expressions to count as words. For in that case, the stage continuum model seems to have problems.
But the problem is that the stage continuum model is intended to reach the proposition expressed by the speaker. If there is no proposition, there is no stage continuum model at all, according to my view. So I wouldn't use...
Meaning counts in the individuation.
In this case, since I claim that there is a pluralism about words individuation, I would have to think which kind of way of individuating words should be suited for this kind of situation. Yeah. Anyway, maybe a stage continuum model could be the wrong choice.
I think this is just a general question about this debate, because it's not one that I know well, but it always sounds odd to me that the whole debate is pitched as a type token issue. It seems to me much more like whatever the relation is between numbers and numerals. I'm not sure why I should think that the inscriptions are tokens of this abstract type. I'm not even totally sure what that would mean. I would have thought what we have is some kind of abstract object. I mean, even on the Kaplanian picture where we want to say, this is supposed to be naturalistic in the good old empiricist sense. But still, the word itself isn't spatially located. Inscriptions of it are. That starts to look a lot like the number-numeral distinction rather than the type token distinction.
According to some scholars, words are located. You can have a community of speakers, they use given words, and the word is there. Okay? And if by chance there is another linguistic community which has these same words, in the sense that same meaning, same spelling, same sounds, but in two different communities, there is one word there and one word there. Well, this is one way of thinking, and this is different from numerals, because numerals seems to be, let's say, more abstract than words and more difficult to be traced somehow.
That's fine. I mean, you could think that words are kind of lineage-like in this Kaplanian way, such that different lineages, even if their semantic phonological properties are all the same, count as different words. But it still seems, I mean, even in paradigmatic lineages, right? It seems weird to say the species tiger is here, even though what it takes for something to be a tiger might depend on it having some sort of spatio-temporal causal connection to physical objects. I'm not sure why that sort of claim would lead me to say that the words themselves, as opposed to the inscriptions, just like the tiger itself, as opposed to particular tigers, is spatially located.
So you're suggesting kind of nominalistic theory of words? There are no types, there are only tokens, and we don't need a notion.
No, why not treat the inscriptions of words as something like representations of the thing, the word. Yeah.
This is one possible way of doing it. There is a paper from Szabo called Expressions and Their Representation, which is another type of type token model, because as I said at the beginning of the talk, the token instantiate the type, and this is one kind of type token model. According to this scholar, the token represent the type. So there is a different relationship. This is what you're saying, and it is another way of treating words. That's true, you can do it. But the problem is, what are you going to do after you integrate the words? You want a thematic proposition, you want a pragmatic proposition, speaker's proposition, and then I think you have to choose which one you have to pick up.
Okay, thank you. Mine is a clarificatory question, because I don't think I get what your argument is. You said that Kaplan is missing the point of Kaplan, but you say something that Kaplan's intention was to differentiate not a word as a word, but as an object.
Yeah.
I don't understand what the difference is between a word as differentiating a word as a word,
Okay.
a word as an object.
A word as a word, I mean a word according to the meaning of the third word. For instance, when you want to do metaphysics, you are interested in things, right? And it doesn't matter if these things is included in one more or less big set of things with some characteristic similar, namely the extension of a term, okay? So if you want to do metaphysics about humankind, you don't need to see the human as human in the sense that you have to look at the definition of humans and then you have to collect these things and make a metaphysical inquiry about these sets. You have to take the human as an object within the whole thing, the whole world, which is made of object. You don't think about what there is by wine, okay? You are interested in what is there, independently of the meanings and independent of the way in which we categorize these things. So, if I want to do metaphysics, one thing is an object, is a thing, is not a thing, blah blah blah, with certain properties. Or is not that thing which is included in the set of other things similar. I think this is a kind of confusion between semantics and metaphysics.
Last question.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I was curious about something which seems to me quite marginal to your talk, but maybe more central to the general project of metaphysics, of words. So at some point you said something about sign language, and I have the impression that that's not exactly in line with what people are like nowadays saying about sign language. So I'm not an expert, but I guess that most linguists would disagree with you in saying that sign language word is not a word. I think they would say it is a word. And I was wondering whether in this project of having a metaphysics of words, you are considering like contemporary studies in sign language.
I'm not saying that sign language has words. I'm saying that we wouldn't use the term words to talk about.
Who is we?
I think speakers. Would you use? I don't know. Well, my intuition is that if you move your hands, I wouldn't use the term words to refer to that gesture. In the same sense in which a parent thinks that we wouldn't use the term word to talk about a scribble. Okay. So what I know about this debate, which is little, is that speakers who speaks both natural language and sign language, when they say dog and they make gesture, they think that they are producing different stage of the same thing they have in mind. So they have in mind dog, which is a continuum. They say dog, and this is a stage, and you say yes, that sound is a word. according to the definition of the dictionary, for instance. But if they make a gesture, they are creating a stage of the continuant word. But if you look at the dictionary definition, for instance, very intuitively, you will not find within the sense of words movement of the hand.
It depends on what dictionary you look at. At sign language dictionary, you have gestures. Yeah, because it's not. So suppose that you're talking, you're signing Italian sign language, and I make a sign which is from American sign language. You're like, what? You can't recognize this because that's not a word of your language. So that's why. And if I do a gesture which is iconic, like this, and this is not part of your language, you recognize this as a gesture, which is different from a word. But it was just like.
Anyway, I don't know. You might be suggesting that we should use the term words even for referring to this.
No, not to this, but to a word of sign language. But maybe you just want to.
Sign language is an abstract thing. I'm talking about the movement of the people. I'm not. Clearly, I believe that sign language has words in the sense of continuants or types. But what I think is that this is a semantic suggestion. We wouldn't use the term word for referring to gesture. This is the suggestion. Okay?
Well, let's read the question properly.
It is usual to distinguish the two notions of context. There is, on the one hand, the so-called narrow context, which is normally used in formal semantics, which is normally understood as a table of parameters whose function is to fix a semantic value of the lexicals. And on the other hand, we have the so-called wide context, which is a much wider notion of context, albeit much vaguer too, which is normally used in pragmatics and can affect the meaning, or I'm not sure if to use the word meaning, but can affect somewhere or another any word. So what I am going to argue is that the notion of, can you see it well? The notion of narrow context used in formal semantics is a notion that we can get rid of, since as long as we are working with a model theoretic framework which has assignment functions, these functions, assignment functions, can do all the job that narrow contexts do. And that this would avoid some confusions that something's happening between them. So, okay, the slide is not complete. I mean, it's no stages. Yeah. I don't know what happened. Maybe I used the other one, which is in PDF. Yeah, this one is PPT, so maybe I should use the other one. Well, it has all the words. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yes, right.
Yeah, where is my? I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't know what happened. Okay. But so, as I was saying, I'm going to argue that we can get rid of the notion of narrow context, that the assignment function, which is necessary in model theoretic semantics, can do all the job in narrow context too. So, just as a sake of just as an example, let's see what a narrow context is. Kaplan's context are, as far as I know, the first and most prominent example of a narrow context. So let's see what they are. Kaplan, as you probably already know, distinguish two kinds of meanings. On the one hand, content, which is just the traditional notion of an intention, the contribution of an expression to the proposition expressed, and on the other hand, character, which is a function that determines the intention, the content of its expression in every context. So, content is just the traditional notion of intention, as I already said. In Kaplan, it's not a function from possible walls to extension, it's a function from possible walls and times to extensions, but if you drop the time thing, you can treat it equivalently with Kripke and intention. So, character, on the other hand, determines the intention of an expression in a context. A context in Kaplan is a tuple consisting of an agent. Can you read the subscripts? It says CA, CL, CW, and CG. They represent, respectively, the agent, location, wealth, and time of the context. And they are used to fix the value of intensity. So, in Kaplan's system, the only context-dependent expressions are I, here, actually, and now, which get, respectively, these parameters are as their value in each context. Now, so yeah, once we have this, what this means is that the extension of an expression can only be determined according to three parameters, which are a context, wealth, and a time. So extension of any expression P in C, W, and T will be, I'll be using this notation to represent the extension for legitimacy sake. Okay, I'll be avoiding superscripts. So yeah, this represents the extension of P in context C, wealth W, and wealth 10. But there is yet another relativization. Why? Because demonstratives, words like he, she, that, are normally analogized to variables. Why? Because they can be either free or bound. They can be used referentially or anaphorically. Actually, what I just said is not accurate. There are many cases of anaphora which are better understood as free uses of a variable. But for the moment, we can just obviate this. So, let's take a sentence like, she's happy. This would normally be translated as an open formula in logical form, which is something that still requires a completion. And every girl thinks that she's happy would be translated as a formula with a bound variable. You can take this sort of logical form, or you can take this, which are more common in formal semantics. Doesn't matter now. So, since demonstratives are analogized to variables, we need an assignment function, which is a function that assigns values to variables. It's just that it's typical from model theoretic semantics. And well, to some extent it works as like context. So we have this relativization to 4 parameters, the context assignment, world and time. But this, okay, just as an example of how this assignment works. Let's take the semantic value of shear stall and context C, assignment G, world W, and time T. This would be true if the object, which is normally a female person, assigned by determined by the assignment function as the reference of G, as the image of X, is stalled in world W and time T. And well, the so-called 5 features, which are things like number, gender, person, are normally thought as assignment restrictors. I mean, they restrict the set of assignment functions that can be used to provide a value for our lexical. So yeah, this is an important thing. The massatives are never translated as just a bare variable. They are always a variable with some restricted 5 features. Sometimes this is dealt presuppositionally, that is, under the presupposition that Gx is a female, then shear stall is true or false. So, yeah, as I was saying, we have this relativization to 4 parameters, context and assignment of world and time. But these 4 parameters play very different roles. Why? Because the context and this segment determine what is said, whereas the world and time determine the extension of what is said. That is, given a sentence, the context and the segment determine what proposition is being expressed in that context, whereas the world and time determine whether that proposition is true or false. I don't know if this is clear. Yeah, don't mind being interrupted. So we can. So yeah, the notion of what is said in Kaplan can be represented like this by means of abstracting over the world and time parameters. Well, Kaplan uses this notation, which I won't be using. So what is said is just a function from possible worlds and times to extensions. So this will represent what is said by phi in context C and assignment G. So, well, yeah, later on, Kaplan changed his mind a little bit and considered context as let's say, a pack of everything we need for generating content, for generating propositions, or whatever. So he placed the assignment function within context. I'll be arguing that maybe the movement that he should have done is the other way around. That we should have considered that context can be, all the role the context plays could have been played by simple assignment functions, which were already traditional when he was writing. So, yeah, we have this simple picture of communication in which we have a context and a sentence, or rather the logical form of a sentence, and out of this we get a content. I think this corresponds much with what minimalism or any sort of traditionalism could depend. Well, if we place the assignment function outside context, then we have this image. Given a context and assignment, and a sentence, we can determine a proposition. So, contextualists have criticized this picture, the simple picture of language. they say that narrow contexts are not enough for determining what is said, that sentences still require a lot of contextual enrichment, you know, all this. I think they tend to mischaracterize sometimes the traditionalists' positions. Why? Because sometimes contextualists tend to see traditionalists as trying to reduce all context dependence to a formally tractable notion by means of a set of parameters and just adding many more parameters to narrow context, such as a demonstrative, an addressee, or it's pronounced addressee. What many contextualists would say is that, okay, the indexicals, the character of indexicals can be given by easy, formally tractable rules, give straightforward values for indexicals, but this is not even the case of demonstratives, which still require intentions, demonstrations, and many other things. And this is much less the case of many other words. So, yeah, well, as I said, I think this is a mischaracterization. It's contextualists sometimes encourage it. But, well, okay, this is just an example. Yeah. So, it has been argued, for example, by Professor Predelli, that the label context, the use of the label context for referring to narrow context has a lot to do with this confusion, with this idea, and that traditionalists are trying to reduce all context dependence to a table of parameters. Professor Predelli has proposed, for example, a label index for the traditional narrow context, which makes sense since they are used to give value to indexicals. What normally contextualists think is that this narrow context or the index are representing the setting of utterance, which is something that cannot be, we cannot do by means of isolatable. You cannot isolate just a couple of parameters and say this is the setting of utterance. I agree with that, but actually narrow context neither represent the setting of utterance. Let us see some examples also from Professor Predelli. I am not here now. There are three instances of I am not here now. I can write I am not here now, speaking to my door, and I'm saying something that's true. In some occasions, of course, not always. They may also use it to lie. The context that we need for fixing the value of this indexicals is not the context of utterance or of inscription, because if I am taking the context of inscription as this context, this will always come out as false, because I am writing in that moment. So, in the moment I am writing, I am there. You have also, well, this is also a sentence. It is 1796. Napoleon, now commander of the French troops in Italy, defeats the Sardinian forces and turns against Austria. Of course, now cannot refer to 2018. And thou shalt not steal. This cannot have a single addressee. When in the Bible, this Bible story, God gave the law to what's the character of the Bible? Was it Moses? Okay, yeah. This sentence cannot mean that Moses shall not steal. It means that no one shall steal. So, the context of this tuple of parameters that is used to give the value to indexicals cannot be representing the setting of the terms. It must be representing something else. Since its role is just to assign values to indexicals, and where we get those values is something that may be very varied. Maybe we may get those values from intentions of the speakers or many other places. What I am going to propose is just to do away with the notion of narrow context and just to work with assignment functions. The role of context in semantics, as I said, is just to fix the value of indexicals. This is necessary for what semantics is about. It's relations such as analyticity, inference. It studies compositionality. And basically, the aims of semantics is, for example, to say why Di Maio voted for himself and so did Berlusconi. From this, you can see that I prepared the slides precisely for this context. And why this sentence has two readings, but it won't tell you which of the two is the one that we're dealing with in a particular occasion. I mean, it will provide two logical forms for this sentence, distinct logical forms, but it won't tell you which one we're using on each occasion. It also has a function of saying who do you want to shut is ambiguous between two readings, and who do you want to shut is not. Providing logical forms is an important task of semantics. But the point is that here we have context, assignment, and acceptance. Okay, they all provide a content when you put them together. But semantics won't tell you which of the two logical forms you can choose from an ambiguous sentence, just as we won't tell you which context you have to choose or which assignment you have to choose. So we have here, Di Maio voted for himself and so did Berlusconi. We provide two distinct logical forms, one in which we attribute to Di Maio the property being an X that votes for X, and another one in which we attribute to Di Maio the property of voting for X. That X happens to co-refer with Di Maio. So, depending on which of those two properties we're talking about, what we attribute to Berlusconi is different. Because on one, we're attributing to Berlusconi the property of being an X that voted for X, which would yield already that Berlusconi voted for Berlusconi. And on the other one, we're attributing to Berlusconi the property of voting for X, which in our interpretation was Di Maio, was the referent X. So, semantics will tell you which of the two logical forms is true, but it will tell you that from the so-called sloppy reading, that is this one, the one in which we attribute to Di Maio the property of being an X and what is for X, you can infer that at least someone voted for Berlusconi, which is something you cannot infer from the other. I don't know if this is clear now. Okay. So, relations of inference. If Sandra tells me tomorrow I won't be here because I'll be at a conference, and Gabriel tells me on the next day, I won't be here tomorrow because I will be at a conference, I can infer from that both Gabriel and Sandra told me that they would be at a conference, but I cannot infer if they told me that and told it to different dates that Sandra and Gabriel both told me that they would not be here tomorrow. So this is what semantics is about. Not about saying which of the two logical forms is the right one in a given occasion. Just as it will tell you which context is the right one and which assignment is the right one. So it's not about how we get the inputs, it's about how given certain input, what are the properties of that content that we get. So this means that of the two differences that are normally attributed to demonstratives and pure indexicals, we can just get rid of one of them. I mean, the reference of, well, okay, I should have put something else in the slides. Okay, demonstratives are normally thought to be either exophoric or anaphoric, as I said, free or bound. Whereas pure indexicals are normally thought to be always only exophoric. I mean, they can only take a reference and they cannot be used anaphorically. They cannot be used to refer to another element of the sentence. And well, demonstratives require demonstration, intentions, or whatever, whereas indexicals have their values automatically assigned by objective features of the context. But if context is something that we cannot determine automatically, then this difference between pure indexicals and demonstratives simply vanishes. So what I'm going to argue is that the other difference is also false. There are many cases in which demonstratives can be used anaphorically, and so indeed they are better understood as variables. So the motivation for treating demonstratives as variables was that they can be either bound or not. But there are many cases in which indexicals are also used like that. Can you read it? Who's worried about this? Only I did my homework. This sentence again has two readings. One which says of the agent of the context that she's the only X that did X's homework, and another that says of the agent of the context that she's the only one that did the agent of the context's homework. And again, let's come back to Berlusconi. I voted for myself, and Berlusconi did too. This is again these two readings. One which Berlusconi voted for me, and another one which Berlusconi voted for himself. So it is tempting to interpret the first sentence as a case of a shifted indexical, which is something that Kaplan completely forbade. No, the indexicals can never have a shift of reading. They must always be about the agent of the context. But you can say, okay, then on one reading, my is not about the agent of the context, since what we are attributing to the agent of the context is that she's the only X that did X's homework. Then if someone else does her own homework, which is then that reading would be falsified. So it would be falsified if someone else did homework which is not the homework of the agent of the context. So this mind would be working as a pure indexical because it has nothing to do with the agent of the context. So, but actually, this is not a case of a shifted first person indexical. Why? Because there is this important principle of semantics, which is called feature transmission under binding. This was the name that was given to it by Irving Heim. It was later on restated by Arnim von Stechhoff. Sorry for the pronunciation. Arnim von Stechhoff, I think it is. as feature, relation, and binding. It was devised to explain this sort of sentences, and this is like only I did my homework, but it also deals with sentences like this. She expects to become a man and buy herself a house. The boys, it think that they are alone in the room. Two men brought the children. Let's take, for example, sentence 7. The boys, it think that they are alone in the room. They here is morphologically plural, but semantically it's a variable ranging over individuals. So, we have the same in 6. She expects to become a man and buy herself a house. This variable should be ranging also over men, not only over females. And few men brought the children. This sentence is a reading in which each of the men referred to is bringing his own children and not collective children they have. So the idea is this principle of feature transmission under binding or feature relation under binding state is basically this. At the morphological and phonological level, bound pronouns receive all the features, or the 5 features, gender, number, etc., of their bounder. So, for example, herself is bound by she, so it inherits its features. So it's phonologically realized as a plural. But at the level of logical form, it has no features whatsoever. It's not restricted. So it's just with no features whatsoever. The boys it's saying that they are alone in the room. They is realized as a plural only because it's bound by a plural noun phrase, which is the determiner phrase, the boys. But at the level of logical form, again, since it's a bound pronoun, it loses its features. It's just a verb, a bound variable, nothing else. And human brought the children will have the same. The 2 readings, the one in which each of the men referred brings his own children, and the other one in which they all bring together collective children. We get it. We get them from a reading in which the pronoun is bound, and another one in which it's free. So when it's free, it loses its plural feature, and it can range over individuals. The case of only I did my homework is just the same. Mine is we have a bound reading of mine in which since it's bound by a first person singular pronoun, such as I, it's realized phonetically as mine. But this is only on the phonetic level. On the semantic level, the level of logical form, is just a bound variable. So this cannot be a case of a shifted first person in lexical. It's not first personal at all. The first person feature is erased. And the other the reading for the other sentence, I voted for myself, and Berlusconi did too. It's just the same. In one, we attribute the Berlusconi is a property of voting for X, which in this case has a first-person feature, so it's about the speaker, about me. And on the other reading, we attribute to him the property of being an X that votes for X. So even though myself is realized as a first-person pronoun only because it's bound by she, by I, sorry. At the level of logical form, it's just a variable. And this is what we attribute to Berlusconi. So here we, it's a logical form, so only I did my homework will be this. here we have a variable which has first person and singular features. And we have here another variable which has, in this case, has first person singular features, and in this case you see it underlined, but it was, I don't know how to say it in this. Okay, the line was taking these features out. How?
Deleted.
Deleted, yeah, okay, deleted. Yeah, it's deleted, right? And so yeah, they were deleted. So here, this variable is representing I, and it's not, mine. And it's not first person. It's not a first person pronoun, only because it has its features deleted. Even though morphologically, yes, it is first person pronoun. Well, another way to see this by means of this allological forms, these are the two readings of. Okay, you definitely do not see this, right? I'm sorry. Well, yeah, this was a screenshot, so it was even before. Well, basically, here we have mine, and here we have mine again. Here are the features. Here it's first person and singular, and here it's not first person nor singular at all.
There should be a line.
Oh yeah, that's true. I didn't remember that. Okay. Okay. Now, you can see, okay, that works for first person indexicals. They can be used anaphorically, just as third person pronouns. But it's also the case of the time and possible world variables. Anastasia has shown that sentences like this, we must have a secretary that speaks Amharic, and I will answer every email that arrives, are better understood if we treat tense and mood as variables of time and world. Why? He understands must as a quantifier for worlds, which introduces world variable. So must. Set of words. We have a secretary that speaks Amharic. Speaks. It's indicative. So if we treat it, if we treat it as if it were an indexical, it should refer to the actual world. So the reading would, if this indicative feature were not erased, would be that we must have a secretary that speaks Amharic in the actual world. So what must be ranging over possible worlds in which we would have the reading that in its possible world we would have a secretary that speaks Amharic in the actual world, but maybe not in that world. So the solution is again to apply feature deletion under binding. So must places a world variable at the level of logical form that erases the reference to the actual world of the indicative tense in speaks. And something similar happens to will. I will answer every email that arrives. That arrives now? No, that arrives in the future. So the present tense, the present tense of arrives must be erased so that we don't get the reading that the person who's speaking will answer every email that arrives now. So this is basically the reason why time, world, and first person variable, indexical, any indexical variables are better understood just as variables because they can just as demonstrative be either bound or free. So if they are indeed variables, which they are because of all those reasons, then it means I would say that the difference between context and assignment is hidden because the assignment is already something that assigns values to variables. So both are determined by somehow by conventions or by many other features. They are not really representing the setting of the utterance, and all they do is just the same, assign values to variables, just to so that we can establish relations of inference or analyticity or conditionality. So as long as we're working with a model theoretic system, we'll always need assignment functions. One of the model theoretic systems. Then we really don't need this difference between context and assignment. Since we have the assignment function, we can just do all the job with that. So, okay, as I said, the lexicals are better understood as variables because they can be either bound or free. They can, fixing the value is important for all those things that semantics studies. And, well, yeah, I didn't say anything about the place in lexicals. Here cannot be bound, but local can. So this is just a speculation. Maybe they can also be treated as variables because the two readings of local means, I say, the local policeman is a very sympathetic person. Everywhere I go, the local policeman is a very sympathetic person. I would say that local there is also working as a variable, as a place variable, but I'm not sure about this. So it's just a speculation. So out of the two differences, wait, it's not that. Okay, it's dialectic too. The two differences between demonstratives and pure lexicals are false. I mean, there is no real difference between pure lexicals and demonstratives. Pure lexicals have also readings in which they are anaphoric, and the reference also requires something aside the simple setting of the utterance to guidance. So, this is basically what I wanted to say. So these two elements of language, pure lexicals and demonstratives, are really analogous. It makes no sense to treat them by means of different mechanisms. So we can just use the assignment function and get rid of the notion of context. This, to a great extent, this is just something terminological. I mean, it won't really affect the formal system. But maybe it could avoid the confusions that the mischaracterizations that sometimes are found within the debates of the separation, semantics and pragmatics. So, well, I think it would help. It will help us to see what, in a clearer way, what the aims of semantics are. It's about the structure of language, not about real situations of speech. Of course, it must be somehow related to real situations of speech, but it's also an idealization. It's the argument is complex. So, I think that was all. Okay, this is the picture I advocate, just a second. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. At some point you mentioned shifting in lexicals, and you mentioned Heim 2001 to sort of like not going that way, from what I understood, like finding a solution to account for indexicals that look like they're shifting.
Yeah, well, what I said is that it's not really.
It's not a shift, but then in example you mentioned Amharic, which is one of the few languages where they have apparently shifting indexical. I thought that was an internal joke, and then. So my question is, and then I kept thinking of like shifting indexical, and then I thought maybe you still have a difference, because at the end you concluded that the difference is quite terminological in a sense, it doesn't change the way we use these notions. And then I thought maybe it does change with respect to the theory of shifting indexicals, about which I don't know much, but if you in those languages where you have indexical shift, only pure indexicals can shift and not demonstratives, maybe there could be something to this difference there. But again, I don't know much. I know something in Turkish where I think only pure indexical can shift, but I have no idea about Amharic. Maybe you do.
I have no idea about neither Turkish nor Amharic. But, okay. From Stefano's theory was also used to deal with the cases of Amharic. What he was advocating was precisely capitalist prohibition. He said, okay, this supposedly shifted indexicals of Amharic are actually bound variables, which are realized by a first-person pronoun like blah blah blah. I honestly don't know the...
You're against monsters then?
Yeah.
Right. So in the normal case, the simple ones like Ampere or something, you also want to do an assignment of values to variable, but then what? The features are there in logical form, and so here can't be time, for example. Well, actually, that's a bad one.
Yeah.
But yeah. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
I see. Okay. I have no objection to that.
Well, idea approved.
Okay, the point here is a particular version of a particular characteristic of Borg's minimalism, that is to say, formalism. She understands formalism in two different ways. I mean, she thinks that there are two different ways of understanding the notion of formalism when we're dealing with minimalism. The first view is that every contextual contribution to semantic content is syntactically triggered. And the second view she puts forth is that formalism must be understood as the view according to which every contextual contribution to semantic content is formally tractable. And she endorses the second way of seeing formalism. This is crucial. And she thinks basically, that this view of formalism is incompatible with the idea that speaker intentions play a role in determining the reference of indexical and demonstratives. And here is, okay, speaker intentions constitute a non-formal aspect of the context of utterance. That's the point, that's her argument. And therefore, speaker intentions, the speaker intentions view that of Kaplan and Lepore is incompatible with formalism conceived as in B. And here is a relevant passage in paper 2007. Let's read it. The worry is that in principle any piece of information may turn out to be relevant in assigning an intentional state to an agent. And here is a nice example. So imagine that you hear Jack say, I would like that, pointing at a cake. It might seem natural to assign him the intentional state of intending to refer to that cake. However, imagine that you also know that Jack is an avid collector of cake plates, but it might seem more natural to interpret it as intending to refer to the plate the cake is on. Or, third case, imagine that you know that Jack and Jill are playing a game in which various foodstuffs stand for various toys. And then Jack's utterance of that might be meant to refer to their toy type. That's her view or argument for the idea that Kaplan's view is not compatible with that form of formalism. We want to ask a question. in the cases discussed by Borg, are really Jack's intentions that determine the reference of that? And Martina will help us answer the question.
Okay, so let's see closer the situation described by Borg, in particular the third one, in which we have a speaker, Jack, uttering a sentence, I would like that, while calling it cake, with the intention to refer to a toy truck. And this happens in the context in which Jack and Jill enter into the game in which foodstuffs stand for toys. And in this case, it seems that the utterance of that refers to the toy truck. So now let's consider a similar case in which we still have the same utterance and the same intention, but in which there is no game between Jack and Jill's about foodstuff standing for toys. So it seems that in this case it is unlikely to consider Jack's utterance to refer to the cake. So, to refer to the toy truck. It seems that in this case he's saying that he would like the cake. And then let's consider a third case in which we have the same utterance but a different intention. So Jack would like to refer to the cake, but in which there is the game as in the first case. And in this case, it seems that given that Jack and Jill have this game, when Jack points at the cake, the game plays some role, so that it seems that in this case, even though Jack's intention is to refer to the cake, that in this case refers to the toy truck. So these two examples are examples in which there is a mismatch between the speaker intention and the reference of the demonstrative. So, and this is related to the fact that there are constraints on what it said. That is an idea that comes from Rise, and that Jennifer Soul elaborated in a work of 2002. In particular, she expresses very clearly that for a speaker to say that P by means of a sentence S, it is not enough for her to mean that P. S must also be a sentence which roughly is standardly used to mean that P. Actually, we can also use sentences in non-standard ways, as we can see also in the example we saw, because the meaning, the reference, the meaning of the utterances are not the standard ones. When the utterance, when Jack's utterance refers to the cake, means I would like the toy truck. Sorry, not the cake. So it seems that it is not only that S must be a sentence which standardly used to mean that P. We can also use words in non-standard ways. But it's still true that it is not enough for a speaker to mean that P. Otherwise, we would run Humpty-Dumpty cases. We can see this fact drawing on a distinction that Searle makes. Searle says that there are many things that speaker means that are neither said nor implicated, so that the classic view according to which speaker meaning is exhaustively divided between what is said and what is implicated is false. And she proposes a rather different picture in which speaker meaning is divided between what is said, what is implicated, and what is neither said nor implicated. And this part of speaker reading is in turn divided into three different notions that she introduces in this work, namely utterance lecture, audience lecture, and rehearsing. And we are interested only in the first one. That is a case similar to implicature, but it is not implicature because not all the conditions for implicature hold. So that she considers a case while presenting this notion in which that is similar to the classic Grecian case of the letter of recommendation. So we have a professor that has to write a recommendation letter for his student Fred, but that thinks that Fred is not a good philosopher, so she wants to convey the implicature that Fred is not a good philosopher, so that he has not to be hard. So he writes in the letter that Fred writes quickly and without making mistakes, and he writes nothing about Fred's ability in philosophy. But unbeknownst to the professor, the job Fred is applying for is a job as a typist. So that what happens in this case is that the implicature fails. But Jennifer says, okay, but there's something going on. And what's going on here is that the professor utterly implicates that Fred is not a good philosopher. So this is in a case similar to what happens in the cake example, in which Jack tries but fails to say that he would like the cake in one case and the toy truck in the other case. So it seems that for non-standard users to sit, we have to share the intention of using words in non-standard ways.
Okay, after discussing this case and trying to translate it into the case of saying rather than implicating, which is what we are concerned now, we try to draw some conclusions about intentions and intentions. Okay, now the title explains itself because we think that there is a sort of ambiguity in the notion of intention, speaker intention in this debate. In fact, maybe there are two senses of intention. In one sense, an intention, call it intention one, is sort of mental state of an individual speaker, something private, something about the speaker, what the speaker intends to refer to, for example. So Jack's intention, was it Jack? Yeah. Jack's intention to refer to the cake or to the toy track. Then we have intention called intention two, which is something slightly different, something public, something shared by the participants in the conversation. This is a very obvious distinction. And, we think that the only way intentions are relevant in the determination, for example, of the reference of emotion and indexicals is intention in the second sense, not intention in the first sense. And, okay, that's just to show you that usually when intention in the second sense are intentions that are shared by the participants in the conversation, and usually we do not specify them because they coincide with the convention, that is to say with the standard meaning of an utterance, for example. Sometimes we change the convention, for example, when we establish a game in which names of foodstuffs stand for toy tracks or toys, and then we change the convention because we have a new shared intention, that is to say, to refer to certain things in a non-standard way. And, okay, let's go back to Borg's worry. Let's read another passage from the paper in which she points out what her worry is. Let's try to see whether our observations can help this worry to be put a little bit aside. The worry is that in principle, any piece of information may turn out to be relevant in assigning an intentional state to an agent. Then she says, the point here is that assigning the intentional states is a defeasible matter. No matter how good an intentional explanation looks to be, it can always be defeated by the introduction of new evidence which would account for the agent's behavior in some other way. She is relying on the example of the game, of course. Thus, there is simply no limit on the amount of contextual evidence which could turn out to be relevant in assigning an intentional state to another. And here the key word is no limit. There is simply no limit on the amount of contextual evidence. We think that she's right, that there is no limit if we consider intention in the first sense of intention. So it's true that there is no limit on intention in the first sense, but maybe there is a limit on intention in the second sense, and that is constituted by the fact that they are shared, public, explicitly stated in the conversation. And, okay, that's the point. We would like to, we do not have a conclusion of this talk, but we would like to pose, to formulate a question now, after having distinguished between these phenomena, and after having discussed the case of the cake. Borg seems worried about the fact that intention in the first sense cannot be compatible with, are not compatible with formalism as she intends formalism. And now we are wondering whether these kind of intentions, maybe better formulated than we did, are compatible with formalism in the sense she means formalism for her minimalistic view. That's it. Thank you.
I completely agree with you that intentions can both fail and be overridden, which is what your example actually showed. But it seems to me that your cases might be used in the direction that a contextualist likes. For a contextualist says that intentions are just one factor in wide context that can be used or can be relied to in order for reference to be determined. And it might be the case that in some context, intentions, in some wide context, the wide situation of discourse, intentions are not the right factors one has to appeal to. For instance, in your case, it might be the case that the existence of a make-believe game prevails on the fact that the speaker has intentions. So I wonder whether the examples that you provide might be used to go in another direction.
Well, the point is that to the extent that these intentions in the second sense are shared, so the idea is that you can find in some, explicit moment, in some moment, some explicit fact that determine which the intention are. So, for example, a moment in which Jack and Jill say explicitly, loudly that that they would use foodstuffs to refer to toys. So, if you are doing something like the discourse semantic, like Professor Borg outlined yesterday or Wednesday, so you can use that piece of information that is not part of the wide context, but part of the discourse to determine the reference.
May I add something? Personally, I'm quite agnostic about the debate between minimalism and contextualism. So, our intention in this talk was to show that minimalists can accept a certain notion of intention. But if it comes out that they cannot, and this is an argument in favor of contextualism, I'm okay with that.
Is it working? I would suggest that there is a very quick clarification. You said something like the important between the two notions is the second one. What exactly do you mean? Do you mean important for matters of communication, for matter of determination of meaning? Because it seems to me that they are two different domains. If it comes to communication, yeah, maybe from the interpreter perspective, yes. From the interpersonal communication, yes, I agree with you. But when it comes to meaning, if you don't give, if you eliminate the importance on the first sense, you lose cases of misunderstanding, for example. So, what? Like failure in communication, even if a meaning is associated with by the speaker to the.
I try to answer briefly, and then you maybe learn something. I think I don't have an argument to show you that intentions in the second sense are always the relevant ones, but the idea is that if you say that intentions in the first sense are relevant, then you probably have anti-Dante. That's the point. That's the first thing. As far as misunderstandings are concerned, I don't know how to answer to this.
I mean, I agree that you have the risk of anti-Dante. On the other hand, leaving the first intention aside, you risk not to be able to account for, common evidence, common cases of, failure in communication, even if there is both the speaker and the hearer gets a very precise meaning of the same. They simply get different meanings.
I wanted to know briefly if you think that the second kind of intention is more similar to the background, Stoner is talking about. Is it something like that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. It's very interesting ideas, and just to say, I obviously should enjoy that because the dialectic is, if you're right, then something that I think is a real problem for minimalism isn't really a problem. So that's a nice line, right? So I should definitely like that. But I guess I am a little bit worried about it still, and I guess for reasons related, I think, to Stefano's point about kind of miscommunication cases. And I was thinking, I wonder if actually the cake plate case is a stronger case here, because with the cake to toy case, you've really got to have some convention going on. But with the cake to cake plate, actually that might not require much stage setting. And the worry that's in the background here is the worry about what's required for tractability, and so it's a worry about the frame problem and about how much information you need before you can start doing an interpretation. So, you come across an utterance of art like that when someone's pointing at a cake. A tractable system might think, well, there's a context of just before lunch, we're all a bit hungry, likely the speaker's picking out the cake, go with the cake. Oh, but hang on, there's a further bit of information. I know that actually you guys really like plates, and that's a particularly pretty plate, so now maybe I should think it's the plate. And then, I've just remembered actually you like the design. It's designs you collect, not plates, so maybe I should go with the design. And that kind of continual introduction of more information that we didn't know was relevant until we started is problematic for computational systems, right? It's a question about how you settle on what information is relevant. So I guess I'm still not quite seeing how we avoid that kind of worry.
Yes, but the point, I would say, in the cake plate example too, is that it is not Jack's intention to refer to the plate that is the crucial thing, but the fact that the others can recognize, and the others can recognize this intention because of something that happens before, something that is in the common ground. So maybe you can find this piece of information linguistically.
But maybe the point, I see her point, because in the quotation you wrote that it might be the case that, in the sense that it is indeterminate, it's not clear.
Yeah,
it might
so
be
something has to be settling.
Yeah, I see that.
I've got one of these, I'm going to stop.
No. I mean, there's a problem with the plate, with the other things that we did not discuss. Okay.
So it's
general problem.
Yes.
You need something to help you decide which of these bits of information is going to be relevant, and it might well be that's the speaker intentions or something to do with the mental state of the speaker anyway.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I was thinking of the case, again, about the case of misunderstanding, and I was thinking of two different scenarios. One where you have a sort of one-to-one correspondence between standard meaning and non-standard meaning. So take the case where you always mismatch the word for washing machine and for dishwasher. This is in Italian, I guess it's very typical, lavatrice, lavastoviglie. And your housemaid knows you never get it right. So he's already used to process washing machine as dishwasher and vice versa when you say it. So this is like a one-to-one correspondence. And if you have to account for misunderstanding, for instance, once you get it right and you're not taken as getting it right, you can, I guess, just use standard ambiguity, and I don't think that's an issue. And a more interesting situation would be the one where you don't have a one-to-one correspondence between standard and non-standard kinds of meanings, but where you have patterns. So suppose when you're very, very tired, you can't say the right word for things, and you mumble a description like you're thirsty, you want a glass, and you don't have it, but you can't say glass because you're really tired, and you say, give me to drink or to eat. This happens to me when I'm very, very tired. And now, suppose that, I don't know, my partner never heard me saying the to drink, but just other things. But because the pattern is shared, it has a generative power so that the interlocutor can understand meaning he never heard before. So I think one interesting part to look at is the cases where the shared language is not just like one-to-one correspondence with the other one, but has this like sort of generative power.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.